Hi everyone, I am so grateful to be here and share a little bit more about my nonprofit. Heads up, I am an introvert, so when you ask me to speak for 15 minutes in front of a crowd, I wish I could just ad-lib like our last two speakers, but I'm a writer at heart, so I will be reading. Well, I'm here today to talk to you about my nonprofit, We Are Her. We Are Her is a nonprofit that's based out of Cardwell, Montana, and we help survivors of abuse or assault heal after trauma. What I really want to talk to you all about today is healing, but I won't get into any explicit details about trauma today, but I do want to issue a trigger warning, just a light one to those in the audience, because I will be outlining some different aspects of intimate partner violence today. Before I get into that, though, I want to start by defining what a survivor is. Before I started doing this work, I remember my college showed me a PSA about what a survivor was. And in that video, I remember a woman with a black eye and tears running down her face. And yeah, that's typically what we think of when we hear the word survivor, is a severely battered woman who is making a mad dash for her keys and escapes with her kids. And yes, that can be a survivor, but being a survivor is way more nuanced than that. The way we define abuse and violence is so limited, and every state defines it legally. Here in Montana, we acknowledge sexual abuse and intimate partner violence as partner or family member assault. However, those legal definitions don't acknowledge the psychological, emotional, verbal, or financial abuse that survivors endure. It's important to remember that domestic violence is not one single act. Domestic violence, by definition, is a pattern of abusive behaviors in any relationship that is used by one person to gain or maintain power and control over another. A powerful quote that I like to use to differentiate what abuse is comes from Dr. James Gill. He says that the act of love is to say, I want you to be who you are. The act of abuse is to say, I want you to be who I want you to be. It's also important to know that anyone can experience abuse. Abuse doesn't apply to only one gender of people or a certain religion or people from a certain socioeconomic background. It can happen to anyone. Montana reports that 37% of women and 35% of men have experienced physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. It's reported that law enforcement officers in Montana respond to a domestic violence-related call every 1.75 hours. So domestic violence has likely affected a third of the people here in the audience today. And you might be asking, how can I help someone who might be in an abusive relationship? Just so everyone knows, I did bring a sheet that I'm happy to pass out at intermission if you'd like to know how to help someone in an abusive relationship. But what I really want to focus on today is another question that doesn't get asked as much. We often treat domestic violence in the same way we address disaster relief. If you leave an abusive relationship, you often have access to temporary shelter, a temporary restraining order, and sometimes even temporary legal assistance. Everything is very short-term focused. We treat domestic violence as if the problem happened over days or weeks, when in reality, domestic violence happens over months, years, or generations. All we have at this moment to help domestic violence is very concentrated, surface-level support that only happens in an acute moment of crisis. So here's the question I really want to talk about today. How can we help survivors months, years, or even decades after they've left an abusive situation? I asked this question for the first time in 2016. I'm a survivor myself, and after receiving some of those short-term services I just mentioned in my moment of crisis, I realized there was nothing else left for me. The CDC estimates that intimate partner violence will cost a female survivor about $140,000. So at the age of 24, I found myself in debt, isolated from family and friends, diagnosed with PTSD, and absolutely no more resources out there to help me. My adulthood had just started, but it felt like my life was over. As a society, we do not have a robust ecosystem of support for survivors. We don't provide any aftercare. And at 24 years old, I realized that. That's part of why I started We Are Her in 2016, to address those problems with the lack of aftercare. I wanted survivors to have community care, access to trauma recovery education, and the ability to share their stories. At first, We Are Her started as a blog, and We started in October of 2016, and just a few months in, we had survivors from across the globe writing in, and I had no idea how they found us. We were sharing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stories, and this was before the Me Too movement resurfaced in 2017. Back then, people really were not talking about being a survivor. It was still way too shameful. But what We Are Her managed to do is provide survivors with the opportunity to talk about being a survivor in a place that was safe and in a place that was non-judgmental. We listened with open hearts and we helped survivors feel seen. I remember a survivor came to us who was in her late 50s. She was abused by her stepfather as a child, and her mother tried to take him to court, but she said since it was the 1970s, there's really nothing done for her. For her whole life, she carried that burden of shame on what her stepfather had done to her. And she said for the first time, We Are Her had really helped her understand that she deserved healing and that she didn't have to go through that shame alone. Shame is a significant barrier for survivors trying to overcome in their healing journeys, because shame compels people to isolate and it gets survivors to withdraw from social care. And that's just one reason that we need to continue to offer services and aftercare to survivors who are no longer in crisis. In 2018, We Are Her officially became a 501c3 nonprofit, and we greatly expanded our services. We offer story sharing opportunities on our website and our podcast, survivor meetups, educational workshops, mental health scholarships, and a survivor retreat. And we offer these services because they are focused on shedding shame and creating a safe space. Two things that are heavily backed by research that contribute to lasting healing. Over and over and over again, I hear the same thing from survivors. No one else is offering this kind of support. And I know why. Healing is hard. The concept of healing is elusive. Time and time again, I hear survivors plea. Just tell me how to heal, they beg. Unfortunately, there's no manual on how to heal, there's no secret formula, and dedicating a whole nonprofit to the concept of healing means we see lots of ebbs and flows and lots of ups and downs. People will experience pain and hurt many, many times in their lives, but what we can do with We Are Her is help them become more resilient, so they have the tools to work through that pain and hurt, and they can rely on a community and the support they received. They can look back to the trauma recovery education they've gotten and have confidence when they share their story. They can begin to find healing from within. So when I sat down to write this speech, my mind kind of went blank. Keith had asked me to speak about healing, and even though I've dedicated my life to this, taken grad school courses, have the lived experience, I just realized how hard of a topic healing really is to cover. It was important for me to share just how hard it is for a survivor to heal, and I hope that by learning about domestic violence, you understand how complex this topic is too. In order for me to really share what healing is, I decided to go inward. Here's a piece of my story, and here's what healing means to me. When I first started healing, I thought that going to therapy twice a week was the definition of being healed. But after a couple of months, I decided that healing meant doing the hard work. So I condemned any Instagram post that convinced me that spa days and manicures and bubble baths or any other form of self-indulgence was self-care. But the hard work of healing is exactly that. It's hard. There's a lot of grief that comes with being a survivor and getting out of an abusive relationship. There have been days or weeks or even months where my excitement for life has been replaced by fear. My independence and my lifestyle have been greatly altered in order for me to feel safe. Most days I feel drained. I will never get back the life I had only just started for myself before I met my abuser when I was 22 years old. So after many years of sitting with that grief, I realized I needed some self-care or I would lose myself. I started listening to my body. At first, I rolled my eyes when I heard someone said I just needed to listen to my gut. After a lifetime of being conditioned not to listen to my intuition by abusive parents, I had no idea how to just turn that instinct back on. In fact, I was fully convinced that I would never be able to relearn that skill. Then one day I started hiking with my 2 dogs, and out of nowhere I felt my legs starting to run, and my mind whispered to me, just go with it. I reached the peak and my lungs were burning and my mind was foggy, but the first thing I thought was, wow, that was me listening to my body. And I'm not a runner, so sprinting up the side of a mountain is not something I would normally find joy in. But that day, I felt an overwhelming sense of joy. My body had some kind of energy in it that it needed to release, and I just let my body do its thing. But learning to listen to your body is a skill, and I found that I needed to practice it, or it tends to fade. It's not an easy skill to nurture, and most days I find that laying on the couch and listening to Love is Blind in the background is how I would prefer to cope with things. And as guilty as I feel about doing that, I've had to learn that letting myself rest is just as valid as the days as when I put in the hard work. I've also found that what I've heard called the second wave of trauma has been the hardest for me to heal from. I spent my whole life exposed to my parents' violent relationship. So when I found myself in one, of course it was hard, but at least I knew what to expect. The hardest part for me was that second wave of trauma that followed after I ended my abusive relationship, the trauma I endured from the court system. The court process is something I wish on no one. It's confusing, it's drawn out, and it was life-changing in every negative way possible. It was during the court process that my story became misbelieved, mistrusted, and maligned. It was during the court process that I felt like the label of survivor or victim consumed my everyday. And it was during the court process that I learned that I only wanted to share my story in the presence of safe people who would honor my vulnerability and resilience. So let's get back to healing. What is it? Again, there's no 101 course on how to heal, there's no guidebook. And why? Because it's different for everyone. The only similarities survivors might share in our healing journeys are that things ebb and flow, and that it's more about the journey than the destination. Because as much as I wish I could look into the future and say, looks like I'll be fully healed by 45, that's just not how it works. I don't think I'll ever be fully healed because being a fully healed human isn't something that exists. Over the years of struggling with grief, the re-traumatization of the court process, trying to set healthy boundaries, and everything else life has thrown my way, relying on those 3 pillars that We Are Her was founded on still feel relevant: community care, trauma recovery education, and sharing my story. It's in the dark moments I've found that having a community of other survivors has been pivotal. Having a community that understands the pain without me having to rehash it means everything to me. To this day, I know there are people in my life I can call up day or night and have their support. Knowing I'm not alone during my healing process is actually life-saving. I saw a quote from Maston Kipp on Instagram that goes, "Most trauma happens in dangerous, neglectful, or toxic relationships, which means that most healing happens in safe, nurturing, and healthy relationships." My friends and chosen family are exactly that to me. They are the people who have proven time and time again that they are safe, supportive, and kind people, and they've inspired me to let my guard down and accept their kindness. I wish I could stand here and tell you that my healing journey has been one where after I experienced the pain, I healed and found a life filled with nothing but joy. And for many outsiders looking in at my life, they might think that's the case. 1 month after leaving my abusive relationship in 2016 is when I founded We Are Her. I'm currently a newlywed in a happy, healthy marriage. I have a solid group of friends and a great career. But between those accomplishments, there have been a lot of days filled with pain. I wish I could say my healing journey didn't include mistakes, but it has. It included a long stretch where I contemplated suicide. It included another long stretch where I found a ton of unhealthy coping mechanisms. And it's included another, thankfully smaller stretch where I did things I'm still too ashamed to admit out loud. Since the trauma, I've become a very distrusting person. I wish I could be more outgoing and friendly, but my trauma has turned that side of my personality around. Every person I meet needs to earn my trust before I let them in. And even though I'm healing every single day, I don't get to choose when the abuse still affects me. I get to live with this for the rest of my life. I just know that it ebbs and flows, and thankfully I'm in a better spot today than I have been in the past. Whether you're a survivor in the audience today, you're someone who knows a survivor, or someone here who's just trying to gain a deeper clarity on what it means to be a survivor, here's what I hope you take away from my speech today. Survivors are trying to heal and deserve love and patience. Something happened to survivors at no fault of their own. Someone made the decision to be abusive to them. And whether they wanted to or not, survivors have taken on the responsibility to start healing themselves. Every survivor has taken a different path towards healing, and I hope you realize that every survivor is different. There's no perfect way to heal, and there's no right or wrong way to heal. We're all just doing the best we can. Because at the end of the day, survivors get to define what healing means to them on an individual level. Survivors are the ones who get to make the messy mistakes as they go. So what's healing to me? It's in the moments in life where I get to be fully present. Moments of joy, moments of grief, moments of anger that allow me to get out of the hypervigilant survival mode and start living my life. Thank you.